I knew something was off the moment. I turned into my own driveway and saw those orange cones lined up like prison bars. My truck came to a stop, gravel crunching under the tires. And there she was, Patricia Hendris, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, standing smugly beside them with a clipboard in hand. "Sorry, Jack," she said, her tone dripping with false politeness. "You can't access your property until we resolve your non-compliance issues." Non-compliance issues? I nearly laughed. My issue was that I had installed a small utility shed behind my fence, a shed that, according to HOA policy, was invisible from the street and perfectly legal. But Patricia had decided it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. I stepped out of my truck. "Move the cones, Patricia. You're blocking my access." She smirked. "Technically, this is HOA property, and until the board votes on your violation, this entrance stays closed." Now, Patricia loved her rules. She loved her power. But she forgot one thing. I built this property from the ground up. I knew every inch of land, every boundary line, and every clause in that HOA contract. Blocking access to a homeowner's private driveway? That wasn't just petty, that was illegal. Still, I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and started recording. "Just confirming," I said, making sure my camera caught her face. "You're preventing me from entering my property?" Her smile faltered. "I'm enforcing regulations." "Good," I replied calmly. "Then you won't mind explaining that to the sheriff." Her face went pale. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," I said, dialing the number. "And I'll bring the HOA bylaws while I'm at it." By the time the deputy arrived, Patricia had lost that smug confidence. I handed him the paperwork and let the law do its job. 10 minutes later, the cones were gone, and Patricia was fuming behind her sunglasses. But she wasn't done, not by a long shot. Blocking my access was just her opening move. What came next would push her from petty tyrant to full-blown saboteur. And when she crossed that line, I didn't just defend my property. I turned her own rules against her. For a few quiet days, I thought maybe Patricia had learned her lesson. The cones were gone, my access was clear, and my shed stood proudly where it belonged. But with someone like her, calm was never peace. It was planning. On Thursday morning, I came home from an early job to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my shed door. "Unauthorized structure, pending removal." My stomach dropped. Patricia had done it again. She couldn't block my driveway anymore. So now she was trying to erase what she couldn't control. I marched straight to the HOA office, a tiny building that smelled like lemon cleaner and ego. Patricia was sitting behind her desk, rearranging papers that didn't need rearranging. When she looked up, she didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Jack," she said sweetly, "we received multiple complaints about your shed. It doesn't meet community guidelines." "From who?" I asked. "That's confidential," she replied, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I leaned over her desk, keeping my tone calm but sharp. "You know that sheds approved by the city. You also know that unless there's a written complaint, you can't issue a removal order." Her smile tightened. "We're updating our procedures." "Translation," I said. "You're making things up as you go." That's when I realized something. Patricia didn't just want control. She wanted a reaction. The more frustrated I got, the more power she felt. So I changed tactics. I filed a formal complaint against her. I cited abuse of authority, violation of due process, and harassment. Then I made a few calls. See, I had a friend in county zoning who confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA had no jurisdiction over structures not visible from the street. Patricia's little campaign wasn't just overreach, it was a legal liability. That evening, I printed out the zoning confirmation, stapled it to her orange sticker, and pinned the whole mess on the HOA's community board under the heading, "False Violations by HOA President." I made sure every neighbor saw it. By the next morning, whispers spread like wildfire. Patricia's iron grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. The following week, I caught her sneaking onto my property with a tape measure and a camera. And that's when I decided to stop playing defense and flip the script completely. When I caught Patricia crouched behind my fence with a tape measure and a camera, something inside me clicked. I didn't yell. I didn't storm outside. I simply watched from my porch camera feed, a smirk spreading across my face as I recorded every second of her trespass. She thought she was building a case against me. What she didn't know was that I'd already started building one against her. That afternoon, I paid a visit to my attorney, a calm, steel-eyed man named Dawson who'd dealt with HOA tyrants before. I showed him the footage of Patricia, measuring my shed and the timestamp proving she'd crossed onto private property. He leaned back in his chair and gave a slow whistle. "She's in trouble," he said. "You've got her on trespassing and harassment. If she's representing the HOA while doing this, She's putting the entire board at risk. That was all I needed to hear. We drafted a formal notice demanding that Patricia and the HOA cease any further interference, citing both the city's zoning approval and the footage of her entering my property without consent. I sent a copy to the board, one to the city, and one directly to Patricia's inbox, with a short note that said, "Smile, you're on camera." By evening, I could almost feel her fury from across the street. Curtains twitched, lights flickered on and off, and the next morning, her car was gone from the driveway, parked instead at the HOA office, where she'd probably called an emergency meeting. But I didn't stop there. I took things public. I posted the footage to a local community group online, not naming names, just describing a certain HOA president, caught violating a resident's privacy. The comments exploded. People started sharing their own stories of overreach and pettiness. Patricia had ruled through intimidation for years, but now, the neighborhood was turning against her. Within 2 days, the HOA board called a vote of confidence. Patricia's name came up, and for the first time, she didn't have control of the room. But she wasn't the type to go quietly. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I heard a noise, metal scraping against gravel. I checked the cameras again, and my jaw dropped. Patricia was back, this time with bolt cutters in hand, aiming straight for my gate. She'd gone too far, and this time I wasn't calling a lawyer. I was calling the cops. The sound of the bolt cutters snapped in the night like a warning shot. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and quietly stepped out onto the porch. The porch light flicked on, catching Patricia mid-swing, her face twisted in panic and rage. "Patricia," I said evenly, "step away from my gate." She froze, cutters in hand, eyes wide as the light reflected off the metal. You can't film me," she stammered. "Oh, but I can," I said, raising my phone higher. "You're on my property again, committing vandalism again. Smile for the sheriff." Her mouth opened to argue, but then the distant wail of sirens reached us. I had already called them the moment I saw her step onto my driveway. Patricia dropped the cutters like they were on fire, but it was too late. The deputies rolled up moments later, their flashlights slicing through the dark. She tried to spin it, of course. "He's lying. He's been targeting me," she said, gesturing wildly toward me. But then I showed them the footage, crystal clear, time-stamped, and undeniable. The deputy turned to her, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, you've trespassed and damaged private property. You'll need to come with us." The look on her face was priceless. Shock melting into disbelief. Disbelief into fury. "You can't arrest me. I run this neighborhood." The deputy didn't flinch. "Not tonight, you don't." As they led her to the cruiser, neighbors began stepping out of their homes. Drawn by the flashing lights, whispers filled the air. Phones came out. Patricia, the almighty HOA queen, was now the evening's main spectacle. I stood there quietly, arms folded, watching as she was driven away. For once I didn't feel angry, just relieved. It was over. The next morning, the HOA board held an emergency meeting, without Patricia. They voted to remove her permanently from the presidency and issued a public apology to the neighborhood for her actions. They even asked if I'd be willing to consult on revising the HOA's bylaws to prevent abuse of power. I accepted with one condition: no more arbitrary fines, no secret complaints, and no one person with unchecked authority. A week later, I stood by my repaired gate, the morning sun glinting off fresh paint. Patricia's house had a "for sale" sign on the lawn, and the street, for the first time in years, felt peaceful. She tried to block my access, but in the end, I opened the way for everyone else. If you enjoyed watching me flip the script on that HOA Karen, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you would have done, and subscribe for more wild neighborhood showdowns. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.